We have two scriptures this morning. The first is from the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But the earth became chaos and emptiness, and darkness came over the face of the deep. Yet the Spirit of God was brooding over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that light was good, and God separated light from darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. Evening came, and morning followed, the first day. And then from Exodus, "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For 6 days you will labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath for the Holy One. Do no work on that day, neither you nor your daughter nor your son, nor your workers, women or men, nor your animals, nor the foreigner who lives among you. For in the 6 days God made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that they hold, but rested on the seventh day. This is why God has blessed the Sabbath day and made it sacred." Ancient words from our tradition for our present day understanding.
Thank you. Well, we're doing a series on how Christianity needs to change to be a contribution to the future. And particularly, for young people that are here. I know my experience of church was the adults didn't want to leave their comfort zone. And so there's certain questions that just didn't get brought up. And so when I left home and went to college, I had to start working that stuff out all for myself. And I didn't find religion particularly helpful in that enterprise. So to me, to have a community that's willing to ask those questions at the gut level, not as doubt, but as faith, that we can be radically honest about science, that we can be radically truthful about human rights, that whenever the church has refused to look through telescopes and turned instead to the Bible to figure everything out, that's never worked out well. Whenever an issue of human rights has come up and people didn't ask what is the just and fair thing to do, but instead try to find old Bible verses to justify why they should be able to mistreat somebody, that has never worked out. So what I'm suggesting is the most loving thing we can do if we want Christianity to follow love, it has to be radically honest. It has to be spontaneous and creative. It has to be artistic. It has to be just for all people. I think the way we save religion is to get back to its core principles, to the spirit that gave it birth. I think the worst thing we can do is try to preserve the answers that somebody else had 1,000 years ago to a modern question. So during this sermon behind me, you'll see a picture from the James Webb Space Telescope. Religious people didn't make that happen. Right? It wasn't religion. A lot of religious people were just fine with Genesis. Right? Who made the earth? God made the earth. 7 days. That's why we have Sunday. On the seventh day you rest, just like God did. But isn't God all powerful? Why would God need to rest? You just have to have faith. Yeah, don't confuse yourself with reason. It must have been a whole lot easier to do this job before science. Right? Just the answer is just because. That's why. Of course the earth is flat. Look at it. Use your common sense, people. The earth is fixed. Why do you think they call it terra firma? Why do they call it the firmament? It's because we're on pillars. Come on, sheeple, don't believe these scientists that are trying to confuse your mind. And it's boys and girls. It's like gender's complete, these two polarities. Don't look at nature to see whether that's true or not. Just look at the answers of the dead people. The dead people had all the answers. So just keep reciting the words of the dead and everything will be just fine. Luther and Calvin were not fans of Copernicus and Galileo. They saw them as uppity. Again, things were so much easier when people are smarter than us, we could just burn them at the stake. And those were the good old days. So this is Martin Luther talking about Copernicus. People gave ear to an upstart astrologer. He didn't even call him an astronomer. He's an astrologer. See, he could have been on Fox News. People gave ear to an upstart astrologer who strove to show that the earth revolves, not the heavens or the firmament, the sun and moon. This fool, this is just good reason, it's good. This fool wishes to reverse the entire science of astronomy. But sacred scripture tells us Joshua commanded the sun to stand still and not the earth. Case closed, ladies and gentlemen. And John Calvin said, "Who will venture to place the authority of Copernicus above that of the Holy Spirit?" Now, you can't argue with that kind of logic. And what I want to also do is empathize with why people were so afraid of what Copernicus and Galileo were saying. Can you imagine how wonderful it would be to have a simple worldview where when somebody says the sun is rising, that's all you had to say? Because you could see the whole universe is rotating around us. So believing that everything was created for us was very easy. And things were as they appeared to be. The idea that common sense would make sense. That all these fancy pants scientists are just trying to mix up your mind. Anybody that sounds smarter than you must be crazy, right? I mean, all the ignorant people in town have come together and we all agree. This Galileo is insane. See, that's the problem, that ignorance and arrogance go together. For some reason, they're linked at the hip. And we live at a time when America has had a reversion to childish, immature rejection of science. Sometimes in the name of science, like Luther did. He was defending astronomy in the face of this astrologer. But what people were needing was a framework that made sense. When Galileo said the earth is rotating around the sun, the conservatives were a lot smarter than the liberals, because the conservatives knew this is a slippery slope. This isn't going to stop with heliocentrism. Right? This isn't going to end with the sun being at the center of everything. This is going to end with there not being a center. See, what's terrifying is not just realizing the earth is the universe is much larger, it's realizing it's an open system. And the human brain doesn't calculate that very well. this is, I'm going through a lot of the work that I've done on the book, and this is one of the reasons why it's taken me 30 years. The idea of bringing Christianity into space and time, that continuum, it's so much easier when space is over here and time is over here and they're both absolutes. But how do you bring this idea of absolutes into a space-time continuum? For years, I would have a nightmare that I was trying to inflate a raft within a closet, and I couldn't understand what it was, but what my innards were telling me is the problem here is you're trying to think of an open system in a theology of closure, in a philosophy of closure. Right? That idea that reality is like our language and it always reduces to nouns and verbs feels really comfortable. The only problem is it butts up against reality. And that's when religion can become either foolish or even sometimes deadly. So I want to look at this picture back here and realize this is the spoiler alert. It's going to be okay. Right? When you look at that, you have a sense, okay, that I want that in my future. Right? I want that clarity. I want that beauty. And that's where honest religion will lead us. It's not where dishonest religion will lead us. So we have to be willing to leave our comfort zone. Faith sometimes means living in confusion. Being willing to let go of the clarity long enough for your eyes to calibrate new truths. So as I speak, this may be like an airy-fairy thing, floating above the earthly plane kind of thing. I'm trying to bring it down to earth. I didn't get that feeling in the first service. Gonna try again, see if we can get this thing to land, actually have legs and things. We'll see. We will see. But that's, I hope, the comfort. When we saw those pictures, at least a lot of us said, yes, that's, that wasn't religious people that got us to that. That's scientists. So religion, if it's going to get to that kind of beauty, it has to be harmonious with science, or there's going to be problems. Okay, so space-time continuum. We're trying to figure how to translate worldview from a long time ago, where the earth was flat, things rotated around us because everything was created for us, remember? So how do we enter into Einstein's universe? We have to be willing to be heretics. There's a quote I ran across this week. Not that I'm a heretic, but I know a lot of you are. And I'm talking about you and you. I cannot pronounce this person's name, but I like the quote. The world is kept alive only by heretics. The heretic Christ, the heretic Copernicus, the heretic Tolstoy. Our symbol of faith is heresy. Because heresy is what somebody else calls you when you think for yourself. I mean, there's bad things too, but I think new theology is always heresy to old theology. In the ancient world, time was an absolute. Right? It existed independently, and you could measure it. Church, part of its proof was its holy history. Right? You tell this history, and it unfolds. What does it mean to have a telescope that's looking back in time to stars that may not even exist anymore? That kind of twists your mind. What happens to absolutes? If Christianity holds on to absolutes, it cannot go there. It cannot see that beauty and that truth. Interrelatedness is the new world. that we live in. In the same way, space is not an absolute. And that's hard. Excuse me. And if I don't live through this sermon, could you finish it for me? Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, because I know your sermon will be about bad preachers getting struck dead. Place is not an absolute. So the idea of an eternal heaven doesn't fit in Einstein's universe. There cannot be a place outside of time. So whatever heaven means must be deeper. It must be more of a process than simply real estate kind of thing. There's a quote supposed to go here, but I don't remember what it is. Let's see. This is Einstein talking about matter as something that doesn't really exist in the concrete objective sense that we think of it. He says, matter is real to my senses, but they aren't trustworthy. If Galileo or Copernicus had accepted what they saw, they would never have discovered the movements of the earth and planets. Now here's the thing, the choice I think for us. The mystical parts of Christianity maybe talk about magical powers and magical people, invisible things, or they may be talking about these really deep, profound interrelationships that can't be put concretely into words. But people experienced them as real. Schopenhauer kind of struggled with this idea of place and time. And he said, human beings are miserable because when we don't have a place, we long, we're terrified until we have a place. And as soon as we have a safe place, then we're bored. And I think in the space-time continuum, that's kind of the balancing act that we're trying to do. And this is good news. It's saying when we're bored, that means we're needing more of the time stuff, and when we're afraid, we're needing more of the space stuff. Hopefully we'll unpack this in a little bit. But theologians have always talked about the eternal now and something like the infinite here. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about the rest of the time here. Eternal now, that sense when you're so present that you lose that fear of impermanence. When the beauty of a flower is so profound, you forget that it's going to die and that you're going to die. You're right there in the present moment, and it's an experience of eternity in that moment, in that instance. And the idea that sometimes when you're exactly the right place, and it feels like this infinite here. Human beings can feel very small in the cosmos when we look at a picture like that. But the truth is, we're the only size where we can have the experiences that we're having. We are like a cosmic eclipse. If we were the size of a planet, we couldn't be sentient. If we were much smaller, we couldn't be corporeal and travel around. So in terms of experiencing the universe and all of its glory, we're the perfect size. So there is a hope in all of this because we're the children of this process. When we remember that, we're the children of the space-time continuum. Then we realize we can have beauty and wonder and all of that stuff without the universe having to change to make us happy. The trick is to find the space and time and the time and space. And I realize that's very strange language. But if space and time is a continuum, then when we think of space in isolation, what we're missing is that there's time in there. And when we think of time and isolation, I've got examples that hopefully will make this easier, but there's a sense that we can have of being lost in time. Everything is impermanent. Everything is fleeting. We look at physics, we learn about entropy, and we think, well, what's the point of it all? Nothing lasts, so why care about anything? Wouldn't it be a shame if we thought of music like that? Right? Because music by its nature can only exist if it's impermanent. Alan Watts used to say, if the point of music was to get somewhere, then the best musician would be the one that played the fastest. Right? Life unfolds. So living in time is what allows us to experience things like music. The beauty of a rose. Right? We couldn't feel the pain of that beauty, the sadness of that beauty, if it were not impermanent, if we were not impermanent. So when the ancients told the story of Genesis, I believe they were trying to find the patterns in time. They didn't know that the world was created in 7 days. I don't think they believed that literally. But they had a lunar calendar. And so stopping every 7 days aligned them to the sky. It aligned them to the seasons, kind of thing. So when people told the story of Genesis, it wasn't a literal story, it was a poem. It was much more like the song that children sing when they're about to jump rope. Right? They're trying to get the cadence of things. So Genesis in the 7 days is not about biology, it's not about astronomy. It's about who we are in the universe and finding that pulse in time, where time isn't our enemy. I believe that's what Stonehenge was about, to have a place where you consider time. Stonehenge was aligned to the stars. So you could sit there in this big, surrounded by these concrete giant stones and say, it's okay. Time is okay. Time is my friend. It's not my enemy. The pyramids were aligned to the stars. I think part of the thing of worship is this is not a magical place, but it's a place in which we celebrate liturgical time. Right? What makes sacred space is that it's a place where people celebrate time. You ever seen those paintings of waves where it's beautiful and the light's shining through it? That's what it means to think of time in terms of space. You're freezing it so you can make friends with it. When it's happening at the time, we get afraid and we get lost. When we hear the music and dance to it, it's a whole different thing. So that's making friends with time. Making friends with space is also hard. Because in Einstein's universe, one of the first places people go is to think, well, if everything's relative, what's the point? Nothing really matters if everything is relative, because they confuse it with relativism, which is different. The fact that everything is interlocking is a good thing. But again, that idea of an open universe, and that phrase is already a contradiction in terms. An idea of an open universe is impossible. The definition of the infinite is impossible. So the human brain short circuits with this stuff. But the symbols, the songs of religion can be a way of calibrating and saying yes to space and to time. One of the ways that time is symbolized all over the world is by fire. So the burning bush is Moses seeing an object that's actually this radiant energy. Right? That's very Einsteinian in a way, to realize that what he's really seeing is energy. Buddha had a sermon where he said, everything's on fire. That's seeing time and space. It's like realizing that life isn't boring because we're going to die. Right? I mean, we are not outside the space-time continuum looking at it. So our lives are not relative. But whether we live or die is an absolute kind of thing for us. So Einstein, let's see. Yeah, I already read that about the matter is real to my senses, but my senses aren't trustworthy. If Galileo or Copernicus had accepted what they saw, they would never have discovered the movements of the earth and the planets. So this idea of the eternal now is when we're afraid, when we're feeling like nothing is permanent. It's realizing that going completely into the present moment and seeing the beauty that's there is an experience of eternity. And realizing that when you're fully present in space, that wherever you are represents everything else. The elements all over the universe are very similar that we know of. So it's like we are not inconsequential. We're small, but we're the perfect size to see that. Like Jupiter has no idea that's happening. Right? It takes a little critter that had to evolve to look up that and say, wow. And I believe that wow is the divine name. I think Moses heard something like that at the burning bush. But when you look up at the sky and you're just moved in awe and wonder, you're part of that cosmic song. In some ways, it was easier to be religious before science. But what a gift to be able to see this, to have lived long enough to see that. There's no stained glass on the face of the earth that is majestic as that. What if we recalibrate religion a little bit so that faith doesn't mean holding on to beliefs against superior evidence, but instead the faith that if we're radically honest about the universe, it will lead us to the sacred? What if that was our religion? And what if the faith came from realizing that whatever the space-time continuum is, we're the children of it? Schopenhauer was very pessimistic, but we do need a home and a path. Until we have a home, we're afraid. Until we have a path, we're bored. And that's kind of the religious journey. In a community to become a kind of ark that can go through the chaos without losing the wonderment. When I saw the first photographs of this part of my brain wrote a little arrow and said, "You are here." And that's kind of the ending of the sermon. That when we see this majestic glimpse of the universe, religion can actually make it deeper and bigger. It can help us not just think about it, but feel it from the roots of our being. That when we look at this majesty, to realize that we are infinitely here and it is eternally now. I invite you to your own reflections on this passage.